I bought the Sony FX3 about 4 years ago. Originally, I bought it as a B camera to my FX6 and as a crash cam / gimbal camera for my larger commercial shoots. But since then, I've shot everything from national spots with underwater B-roll to run and gun corporate content on it. Today, I want to talk about where I think that it fits in the current market and where I see it going. I remember when this camera first came out, it was pretty polarizing because a lot of people just thought that it was an A7 III shoved into a new body with maybe an additional fan, which they were right to a degree. But I think what people missed was the capability and flexibility that this camera brought to the Sony ecosystem. The flexibility that this camera offers is really astounding, with the built-in RAW output through the HDMI, as well as the internal codecs that are pretty robust. Over those years, the Venice has become more popular, and so the FX3 as a C camera or B camera to that has become even more popular because the sensor on the FX3 is something pretty special. All in all, this camera really is a utility workhorse. It's a reliable camera that can fit in tight spaces and checks a lot of the boxes for a lot of large and small productions, and I think that's why it's become so popular. So I want to talk about a few projects that I've used this camera on. To start out, one of the larger projects that I ever shot on this camera was something that I did for Seaholm. That's a spot that I shot solely on the FX3 with a Rokinon Cine AF glass, or the Samyang glass, depending on what region you're in. And that's a spot that really solidified my belief in the FX3. I got to use the camera in a really harsh environment with a lot of tricks thrown at it, and the autofocus performed very, very well, and the camera was very reliable even in the harsh conditions. Now for that spot, I only used the FX3, the small rig housing, and a splash bag that I got off of B&H. Something interesting I learned whenever filming in water is whenever you put your lens into the water, you effectively double the focal length, so you want to be as wide as you can. For that particular splash bag, it's not rated for diving or anything, it's rated for small splashes and maybe some quick submersion. So a pro tip, if you're going to use this housing and you want to make sure that the camera stays dry and if there is any leaks that it's not splashing around, there's this stuff that you can buy off of Amazon called Pigskin. Essentially, it's just a super absorbent mat that you can put in the bottom, and so if any water does leak in, it automatically is absorbed by that, and so your camera has less of a risk of getting ruined in case any water seeps in. This camera also excels at tourism work, which I do relatively often. A lot of times tourism work is smaller crews, and so you need a camera that's flexible and can adapt to a lot of different situations. This camera has the ability to do quick on-the-fly adjustments, and it's a camera and a color science that a lot of production houses are used to and understand. Another thing that I've used this camera a lot for is corporate interviews. Now, the camera's phenomenal for corporate interviews. It can roll as long as you have battery, and the codecs are pretty good. Now, something that one of my buddies, Clark, tested was the difference in the codecs when doing interviews. And what he found was there's actually a small difference in the magenta shift in each different codec. And so if you go into the lower codec, and then you go into your higher codec, you may notice a small magenta shift between the different codecs. So that's something to be mindful of when filming interviews. Now, something that is very, very cool about this camera whenever you're doing interviews especially is the autofocus. Sony may not have been the first, but they've been one of the best implementing autofocus into their systems. And I think that that's something that's honestly making this camera really attractive to a lot of people, everything from wedding filmmakers all the way up to commercial clients. I remember being adamantly opposed to autofocus in the very beginning. I thought that it was a cop-out and it was cheap. But even in the commercial world, we're starting to see autofocus being implemented more and more. I remember originally being adamantly opposed to autofocus. I thought it was cheap and something that probably wouldn't ever stick in the industry, but now we're seeing it integrated a lot, even into commercial and doc work. I was listening to a podcast the other day from a documentary filmmaker, and they were talking about how originally they would have maybe 75% of usable shots, and then they would bust maybe 25% of them. But now using the autofocus system like on the FX9, the Burano, the FX6, the FX3, they're starting to see more like 90% of their shots are usable. And that's something that has aged really well, the way that they've implemented and continue to improve the autofocus. Something else that I think has aged well is the reliability. This camera has an insanely fast boot up time, and I know it's something that's always going to turn on. It's something that I rely on and that I count on, and I fully trust. Every time I need a quick shot, I know if I grab the FX3, turn it on, I can be ready to record in a couple of seconds. The FX3 was one of Sony's earlier systems to include the sensor stabilization, and I ended up falling in love with Sony's sensor stabilization technology so much that I almost wanted to get out of the FX6. Now I've got the Burano, which is kind of the best of the FX6 and the FX3 combined, but that's something that I think Sony did really well. Another small thing Sony did was integrate auto rotation into their files. So if you hold the camera vertically, you get vertical video out of it without having to rotate it in post. Now that's a small thing and it's something that doesn't really change post all that much, but it's really handy when you're shooting content. And doing that 4 years ago I think was smart foresight because vertical content wasn't as popular then as it is now. There's a few things that make this camera very attractive for the professional market, and all of that depends on S-Log3. Including S-Log3 seems like a no-brainer for this camera, but even though it's a no-brainer, I still think that it was Sony's smartest move because that opened up this camera to shoot on more professional sets. Having S-Log3, the same color profile that we're seeing in the Venice and some of the higher end systems, allowed this camera to be used side by side on those productions. So you can put this camera in places that you might not be able to fit a Venice, an FX9, a Burano. It can cut in as a quick gimbal shot and almost replace Sony's Rialto in a lot of scenarios, especially if the production didn't have the budget. A testament that I think lends itself to how well this camera has aged is how well the camera is still selling in 2025 and what the resale value looks like. From time to time, I get younger filmmakers asking me what camera they should get in 2025, and a lot of times I recommend the FX3 to them. And there's a few reasons that I still recommend this camera. One, it's industry standard and a lot of production houses understand and use the color science of the FX3. Two, it's got a track record of producing really good content, all the way from high-end Hollywood productions down to wedding films that look really good. This camera can really cover a lot of the bases, so it's a camera that can grow with them. And three, Sony is planning on supporting this camera for a long time to come. In fact, in the new 7.0 that's supposed to come out in September, we're going to see a lot of really cool features, and one that I'm really excited about is the new unified menu system that we're going to get across the entire cinema line. Sony announced that they're going to be standardizing the UI to match everything from the Venice down to the FX3. So it's going to be something that's really familiar as you bounce from some of the higher end cameras all the way to the FX3. And that includes the Big 6 menu, which is one of my favorite things when shooting on the Burano. It's basically a 6-panel layout that gives you quick access to your ISO, frame rate, etc. They're also adding in some new anamorphic desqueeze options, but one of the biggest and most powerful things that they're adding into this camera is the ability to record B-RAW. Now, right now, we are locked into using ProRes RAW, which is okay, but a lot of times it has to be converted, especially if you're a DaVinci Resolve user. So having the ability to choose Blackmagic RAW as well is something that's really powerful. But really, in summary, it just shows that Sony is still listening and trying to integrate and improve this camera as it's approaching into 2026. Now, all in all, I think the camera has a very good value proposition, especially in terms of cost to image ratio, but I don't think that everything is perfect about the camera. The camera does not include open gate recording, which is something that's becoming more and more popular as we're doing commercials that are going both vertical and horizontal, as well as some of the magenta shift issues that you have between different codecs. That's something that I think Sony could work on and streamline themselves. And one of the biggest, most notable drawbacks for me is no SDI. Now, it's not a total deal breaker. I assume it was because of size, but I would love to see that in the next version of this camera. If they could figure out how to fit an SDI port into a camera this size, I think it would be a very valuable upgrade, especially in terms of when it is a cinema camera. So who do I think that this camera is for, especially in 2025? Well, we cover the whole basis. We cover everything from wedding films and corporate content all the way up to national level commercials and Hollywood movies. I think this camera fits a need in a lot of different use case scenarios. We've seen it used as an A camera like on the Creator, and then we've seen it shoot a lot of wedding films. Now, this camera is also a very specialty camera. It can be used for a lot of tourism and run and gun content, or it could be used solely as a crash camera, or putting it in a very tight position where you couldn't fit like a Venice or something like that. So I think this camera covers a lot of different bases even in 2025. If you're looking at getting into your first camera or getting an FX3 in 2025, I think that the FX3 is a valuable contender. Now let's say you bought this camera today and the FX3 Mark II came out in September. I still think that this camera is valuable just because of the history that this camera has and what this camera can produce. It's a compact, reliable, cinematic tool that can be great for solo filmmakers or be great for larger crews. So can this camera be beat? Well, sure, there's a lot of really powerful systems out there, and there's some cameras that contend with it really well. I think that comes down to the personal choice of what you want to invest in. But even in 2025, I think that this is a safe buy. A lot of productions have adopted this, and a lot of filmmakers have grown to love this camera, and that's shown by the continued sales and resale value of this camera. My name's Keaton Nye, and I'm sharing my journey and what I've learned along the way. If you want to continue growing together, consider subscribing. This is just the beginning of the conversation.